If you want to, you can turn in your Bibles to the book of Judges. Judges chapter 1. Ooh, coming live with the sound there. Judges chapter 1. I'll join you there in just a minute. But today, I'll tell you up front, we're just going to get right to the point. There are times when it seems perhaps that get up here and sort of beat around the bush. And I don't know, maybe that's because beating around the bush sometimes loosens some of those grand and wonderful blessings that we have that God can give us. But today, it's going to be just straight to the point. Straight to the point. Today's lesson is going to be reap what you sow. Now, I think most of us understand exactly what that concept is all about. If you go down to the grocery store today, you walk into the store, you see all of the abundance of the vegetables that are there, right? Everybody loves the veggies, right? Nobody goes for the snack foods and the chips and all that. You stay away from that stuff. Right, you go in, you see all the veggies. You get the carrots, you got, the tomatoes and, the kales and lettuce and all of that. You see all that stuff sitting there. Nobody stands in front of those things and ponders to themselves, I wonder when all of these were born. I wonder how many eggs these things hatched from. We don't ponder those types of things because we understand the concept of reaping what you sow. We understand that from the seed of corn comes an ear of corn because it grows into a plant of corn, right? Now, don't go away today and when someone asks you, hey, what did the preacher talk about today? We talked about corn. No, I'm not talking about corn. We're talking about reaping what you sow. And while it is certainly an illustration that's used in the Bible and has this kind of agricultural backdrop to it, there is this fundamental point that we find throughout the entirety of the history of man, especially when it comes to their interaction with God, this idea, reap what you sow. Now, sometimes we say, you reap what you sow. But I think sometimes that leaves with us an impression of negativity. I mean, when you think, you reap what you sow. When is that most often spoken? When we're talking about good things or when we're talking about bad things? You're going to reap what you sow. Bad things, right? There's an entire book of the Bible that talks about reaping what you sow. I don't know if you knew this or not. You just turned to it, the book of Judges. And for the most part, it is. It is a negative book. It's a book that begins with some statements that kind of describe the people, but by the time we get done with the book, there is a blackness, a darkness that exists there that can only be summed up with that statement, that horrendous statement, that horrible statement at the end of the book, which sounds kind of like this. And the people did what was right in their own eyes. And you look at the world in which they lived and you're saying to yourself, that can't be a good thing. That's got to be a horrible thing. But sometimes I think what we forget about is that all was not dark. All was not black. All was not unrighteousness. In this same book that talks about the sowing of unrighteous seed to reap unrighteous reward also tells us about some righteous people who stood up and stood upon God's word and did his will. You see, if you begin at the beginning of the book, there's this odd thing that kind of occurs. There's this odd little story that is told right at the beginning. Before we get to that, I want to kind of share with you a passage that Paul gives us in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 6. Paul writing to the Corinthians who had more than their share of trouble, who had more than their share of reaping and sowing, in a negative way. He said this. He said, the point is this. Whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. You see, there's a good side to this whole reap what you sow. And there's a bad side to the whole reap what you sow. And the difference is what you make of it. What your attitude is. Various things that we'll talk about here in just a few moments. But there's this interesting little story that occurs in Judges chapter 1. It's an odd book from this standpoint. And it begins with this story about a guy by the name of Adoni Bezek. And he's this foreign king. He's this foreign king that is taken captive. And when they take him captive, they cut off his big toes and they cut off his thumbs. Cut off his big toes, cut off his thumbs. All right? Well, I'm sure there was a good reason why they did that. But perhaps the best reason is given to us by the guy himself. Beginning in verse 7, it says, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to pick up the scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. We've never heard of this guy before. We've never heard of this guy before. He is not a large character in the biblical narrative of the Old Testament. So why does God even tell us about this? And why talk about, the thumbs and the big toes cut off? I think God begins the book this way because he wants his people to see, just like he wants us to see today, the concept of you reap what you sow. This guy had done it to other people. And now it's being done to him. So much hangs upon the actions that we take today, and yet all too often we fail to see it. One little thing can change the course of events of our lives and the lives of other individuals. And yet we fail to see it. Sometimes the whole reap and sow concept is summed up in other people's minds by, cause and effect. What you do now will affect something else later. I'll give you kind of a positive and negative example of this. Several years ago, my parents owned a home in a little town called Clyde, Ohio. It sits up real close to Sandusky, Ohio, which is just right on Lake Erie and is famous for their, roller coaster capital of the world amusement park that's up there. Well, they bought this house and it was 175 years old. Now it's part of the historical society there because they restored it for the most part and kind of made it livable. But they bought this house and they began to restore it. And one time, one of my friends and I, we went up to kind of help with some of the efforts, and we were given the task of going in and gutting the bathroom. Gutting the bathroom. You ever gutted the bathroom of a 175-year-old house? Not as easy as it sounds, right? You would think just kind of ripping everything out would be a real simple thing. But all we were really supposed to do was take the appliances out. Take out that old, toilet, take out the old tub, take the old mirror fixtures and, things off the wall, do all of that. So we're in there in the midst of doing all of this, and there's this nail. There's this nail. It's just like in the middle of the wall, just maybe, a couple inches above arm's reach, where you just had to kind of get on your tippy toes and pull it. You decided, well, we're going to take that out. So my friend reaches up and grabs that nail, and it won't come out. It won't come out. He says, well, now it's a challenge, right? Now it's kind of a, threat to the manhood here. We got to get the nail out because, little nail's not going to, daunt us. So we go and we get the, little crowbar thing, and he goes and he kind of pries on it, and it starts to come loose. He puts the crowbar aside. He pulls the nail out, and the entire wall falls down. Entire wall falls down. I mean, the plaster, it's that old kind of wall, where they had the little slats of wood. The little slats of wood with the plaster in between and the layer of plaster over top of that. That whole layer of plaster just comes crashing down to the ground. We gutted the bathroom. Just not the way my mom wanted it. Negative thing? Well, it ended up being a good thing, but one little thing can cause, repercussions or these waves to go out for a long, long way. Another little story I'll tell you about this idea is really bound up kind of in this coin. It's a coin from another country. It's now in the basket. Coin from another country. And one time I had them sitting on my desk in the office, probably a Costa Rican colonie. And I had him sitting on my desk in my office, and one of my kids came in and they asked me about the coin. Because it says 500 on it. 500. My son picks it up and he says, ooh, is this worth $500? And I told him, no, it's not worth $500. Well, how much is it worth? How much is it worth? And I said, well, it's worth about 5 cents. If you can find a place that accepts it. But you're probably going to have to go to Costa Rica or some other place that, accepts colonies in order to do that. Or some place that will give you an exchange. And really, it's probably not worth the 5 cents to actually go find the place that would actually give you the money, for it. And he was kind of disappointed, but little did I know, he kind of palmed the coin. And when we left the office, he left with it. And he decided that he was going to put it in the collection plate. Put it in the collection plate, and when they went through the collection plate, they picked it up, they counted the money, and they're like, what is this? What is this? A little while later, I found the coin sitting around in another place. That led to me writing a daily note about usefulness and about how some things, are only useful when we take them to other people and other places. And that daily note went through several different people and several different stages and ended up at the house of a woman who needed to hear a lesson about usefulness. I've been unfaithful to the church for many, many years. And through that note and the encouragement of a local congregation, decided it's time to get useful again. All because of a little coin left on a desk. You reap what you sow. It's just a little tree with some ornaments on it. But how great a good can you do by simply picking one up? The greatest thing about all of that is I think we understand that. As was already pointed out, and we are blessed by so many people who know and understand and love this concept so well. So in a great sense, I'm just kind of preaching to the choir, reminding us of what we already know and have embraced this morning. But then again, maybe you haven't embraced it. Let's be reminded. There are three parts to this idea. The first one is the idea that everyone sows something. Okay? You cannot be neutral. You cannot be neutral. You can't just decide, well, I'm not going to sow anything. I'm not going to sow bad. I'm not going to sow good. I'm just going to try to be, kind of a go along, get along type of person. And, how can you condemn me for that? How can you really say that, that's kind of a wrong thing? Well, God spells it out and he calls it a wrong thing. You turn over to Revelation chapter 3 and verse 16. There is this letter that's written pretty much the estimation of Christ, of the Father, about the seven churches of Asia, and he's talking specifically to a church in Laodicea. And he tells them that I see you. I understand. I look at your situation, the things that you do, the things that you don't do, your intentions, the genuineness of your heart. I see it all. And what I see is that you're not committed. You're neither hot or cold. You kind of want to pull the middle ground here, and it just can't happen. Matter of fact, God goes so far as to say it makes me sick. I will spew you out of my mouth. Everybody sows. Everybody sows something. When I was going through the sermon, it reminded me of this interesting point of history that I remembered reading some time ago. It was about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, in the midst of the Civil War, he got kind of fed up. Got kind of fed up with the ineptness, the lack of ability by one of his commanders by the name of General George McClellan. So he wrote him this letter, and the letter in part said this: if you don't want to use the army, I should like to borrow it for a while. In the midst of one of the greatest battles in our country, if you're not going to use the army, I'd like to borrow it for a while. You can't sit inactive and not suffer the consequences. You cannot try to stay neutral, because in doing so, you do that which is evil in the sight of the Lord. Imagine if a friend consistently told you things like this: well, I'm just not sure I really want to be your friend. Maybe I do, but then again, maybe I don't. Or your spouse. I think I'm committed to you, but, I'm not really sure. I don't know. Let me sleep on it. Give me till tomorrow. Or, I just don't know. I mean, how committed are you going to be to that relationship? Or are you going to find that acceptable? Well, I find that, the indefinability of our relationship is the best thing about it. Nobody says stuff like that. And if they do, they're lying to you. Because nobody likes to be in an undefinable relationship. And God certainly does not want to be in an undefinable relationship. Everybody sows. Now, because everybody sows, everybody reaps. Everybody reaps. There's a harvest. You will get the things that you put in the ground. You put corn in the ground, you're going to get corn out. You put righteousness in the ground, you are going to get righteous things back out. Because everybody sows, everybody is going to reap. Listen to what Job says about it. If you turn over to Job chapter 4, Job chapter 4, just look at verses 8 and 9. Verses 8 and 9 of Job chapter 4. It says, as I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. By the breath